Morning, ladies and gentlemen. When I was last here, when I finished Harper 25 years ago, this was a cowshed, so well done, it's fair change. So, as Sophie said, we found locally Sophie, just over 400 acres in the Vale of York. So we've got a very varied land type. We've got blowaway sand through medium loams onto some clay. We've got a bit of silt in there as well. We've got a fairly diverse rotation: wheat, barley, maize, quite a few spring crops, spring oats, spring beans, spring linseed, trying to get that diversity between autumn and spring cropping. In there as well, we've got permanent grasses and temporary herbal lays. So we're rotating the livestock, or keeping the livestock on the arable, going around the arable as well as on the permanent ground. Utilising that forage, we've got 38 cow pedigree Slayer supper herd, and started farming regeneratively in 2014, went down the strip till route on the arable, and gone from there really around the strip till for a couple of years, and then went to a direct distro for even lower disturbance. So in that region ag, we're working with the 5 principles or 5 pillars that were laid out by Ray Archuleta, Gabe Brown, in the States. They developed them about 30 years ago now. So those being minimal soil disturbance, utilising the no-till, long and diverse rotations, as I said, cover crops before a spring crop, and catch crops if we've got 5 to 6 weeks between harvest, one crop and drilling the next in the autumn. Good degree of soil armour with living plants and residue, and grazing livestock on the arable. My main motto is soil comes first. Everything I do, the soil is my first consideration. So we're not using any seed treatments, not using any insecticides, plant growth regulators, or bagged P&K. We reduce our herbicide rates. We're typically running about half what conventional agriculture would require. We reduce our nitrogen rates by over a third. Using biology nutrition and synthetic fungicides, using biology nutrition instead of synthetic fungicides and insecticides, though we do have them in the toolbox should we need them. We haven't cultivated anything in the last 8 years. We don't sell any straw. We use what straw we need for the cattle, we bale, and the rest is all chopped. And we're putting out that straw back as farmyard muck. We're also applying green waste compost, and that's keeping our P&K levels correct and supplying organic matter. We've got flotation tires and all the equipment as well. So my cultivation team and my worms, in there you can see small piles of it's actually beans of residue. Each of those small piles has a deep burrowing worm underneath. That's its midden, as it's called. You move that aside, there's a hole approximately the size of a big barrel that goes down to up to 2 metres in depth. And that is the natural drainage that the worms are providing us, as well as processing the organic matter that we're applying. We apply muck in the autumn, by Christmas it's gone. The worms have pulled it down. So that the worms and the roots are our cultivators. So I mentioned we catch and cover crops. So a catch crop might well just be from winter wheat going into winter barley. So just have a quite cheap mix of linseed, cereal and buckwheat typically. So that's providing us roots, rapid growth. It's also providing flowers for the pollinators. Even in that 6 weeks, the buckwheat will come to flower. And then the cover crops are far more diverse, and we'll spend a bit more money on that. So that's giving us legumes such as beans, peas and vetch, as well as clover that we'll put in. So that's locking nitrogen up for the following crop. It's also rapid growth. The beans and the peas will also flower. Linseed, which gives us a lot of fine roots on the surface or in shallow just below the surface. Buckwheat, which harvests phosphorus for us, and also flowers, Phacelia, horseradish, mustard, and sunflowers for more diversity, including sunflowers, which have a C4 pathway, whereas all the other crops will grow a C3 pathway. And if conditions are right, we'll mob graze a neighbour's sheep on the cover crops. Back in Boxing Day 2015, we flooded badly from the River Ouse, which you can just see at the back of the tractor, the flood bank of the River Ouse. That field there had 12 to 15 feet of water on it for about 6 weeks, gradually dried. It was too wet to establish a spring crop. We put muck on, put this cover crop in on the 1st of June. That was sunflowers, vetch, camelina, and Facelia. And that was running wheat on the 28th of September, sniff of glyphosate and diffuse bug pellets, and we got 5 tonne crop of wheat off that. One typical way to measure the health of the soil is using a slate test. So you simply drop a dried piece of soil in the top of a tube of water just into some fine mesh. On the left-hand side there, that's obviously just started. The no-till soil is on the left-hand side. The conventionally farmed soil is on the right-hand side. After half an hour, the no-till soil is largely held together. A little bit dropped to the bottom. The conventionally farmed soil is all in suspension. What's holding the no-till soil together is the glues, or the glomalins, that all those living roots are pumping out to feed the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, which are then, in return, from that feed, they're bringing the nutrition back to the plant. So by holding that soil together, you're not having the soil erosion, you're not having the nutrient erosion into the land drains and away into the rivers. You often hear farmers complaining about dredging rivers out and sedimenting the rivers. If we look after our soils, that isn't a problem. We need to look after our soils before laying blame on others. So in field diversity, increasingly looking at using varietal blends in monocrops. So my winter wheat is an 8 variety blend, winter barley is a 4 variety blend. We're companion cropping the oilseed rape. So in the oilseed rape, we've got buckwheat, crimson clover, berseem clover, and spring beans and some sunflowers in there as well. We're looking at biocropping, just changing the drill so we can drill 2 different plants at the same time properly. So looking at peas and barley, or beans and oats. And again, come back to either splitting in the yard for selling as 2 different crops, or for going straight into a livestock ration. And we're doing quite a bit with a permanent white clover understory as well. Getting that established in the bottom of the cover crop in the summertime, and then that going through, and we're trying to keep that alive as long as possible in following cash crops. So for plant health, organic nitrogen is far better than inorganic nitrogen, which is why we're doing as much as we can with organic products, whether that be FYM or green waste compost. As I said, we reduce our N levels down, so winter wheat, we're now down well below 150 kilos nitrogen. We're actually about 80 kilos nitrogen this year of applied product. But if you're above 180 kilos nitrogen, that will shut down all the soil biology. You won't get that soil biology working for you. We're using the foliar amide nitrogen with a small amount of granular nitrogen just to kick the crop off. Through doing that, we're not getting that luxurious crop growth in early spring, which means we don't need the plant growth regulators and we don't need the synthetic fungicides. The crops are far healthier and they don't attract insects. So it's using the plant health, bettering the plant health to work for you. Carbon source with all the nitrogen fertilisers, so we're adding fermented molasses in with the foliar nitrogen. By adding a carbon source in the molasses, it means that the soil life has immediately got carbon there to access to balance the nitrogen, instead of it going looking for the carbon that is in the organic matter that's in the soil. So we're not degrading the organic matter in the soil. and we're SAP testing continually through the growing season and applying micronutrients as required on the results of the SAP tests. I brew biology up from bought-in concentrate, contains reagent bacillus and trichoderma. I use that in the slot-up drilling. That helps the plant get an early boost of nitrogen from a small amount of organic matter breakdown. It also acts as a phosphate source. Excuse me. There's two different concentrates. I use the second concentrate I use as a foliar product, and that helps me to reduce or replace fungicides and the PGRs. All the time we're looking at boosting the beneficial insects within the farm environment, which again reduces insect pressure on the crops. So all these we're doing primarily through mid-tier scheme. So we've got next flower mixes on some of the margins. Other margins are tussocky. We don't have any beetle banks. We've taken field corners out for for pollinator mixes. We've got diverse floors through the GS4 and the other herbal lays on the farm. And because we've mob graze, we've got long periods without any grazing. And we cut our hedges every other year as well, instead of every year. So this all goes into that question, well, are you making any money? Conventional on the left-hand side, I've used NAAC figures, so it's an average, it's an independent cost. Subsoil monitoring every 4 years, whereas we just direct drill. Higher nitrogen use using current prices. Fungicides, we put in a bit for the biology that we use. Far lower costs, and we've got a yield equivalent that we can, as you would say, be in that and still produce the same margin of 1 3/4 tons per hectare. We certainly aren't losing that level of yield. We've maybe a slight reduction in yield, but it was nowhere near that figure. So we are, as well as finding better for the environment, reducing our greenhouse gases, we're also making more money. A couple of key points with the carbon. 60% of all carbon taken in by the plant goes into the roots, and it's usually by the roots to feed the soil biology. That's through the global links, feeding the soil biology, feeding the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which then feeds the plant in return. For every kilo of inorganic N applied, organic matter is burnt off. If you're ploughing or heavy cultivating, you can release 2 to 5 tons of carbon dioxide and a further 3.5 to 5 tons if it's overwintered. In comparison, if you direct drill an overwinter cover crop, you sequester 5 tons. It's 15 tonne a hectare difference. It is substantial, not to be ignored. Onto the grassland side, or forage side of the business. We're primarily multi-species herbal lays, that's both for grazing and for silage as well. They're high yielding and they're high quality with a high level of drought resistance. And as well as that, they're massively beneficial for the environment. In the flowers, in the habitat they give as well, by not having everything graze the bone all the time. Got a wide range of species in there, no fertiliser requirement, no P, no K. We're mob grazing for an average of 40 days rest period. This time of year when grass growth is high, we're up near the 50, 60 days. Late autumn, we're getting down near the 30 days. We don't use any soya. The protein we put into the rations for the older cattle. We're just using homegrown beans as the protein source. We'll only deworm if absolutely essential. Forage follows a sigmoid growth curve. So we are maintaining a minimum of 4 inches sward height, and that's the same whether we're grazing or if we're mowing the silage. If you can keep above that 100 mil, that 4 inches, you're keeping the highest speed of growth. So you get the highest, your forage growth is the most efficient it can be. I'm quite happy to graze once grass is headed, and the calves, when you let them through into the next block, the next cell on a morning, they go straight for the seed heads, because that's where the most protein is. As well, every time you graze or you mow, the roots in the soil go back to be approximately the same level of depth as what's above ground. So every time we graze, we're knocking those roots back. Every time it regrows, it's producing organic matter, it's pumping carbon into the soil. You can gain 17 days of growth by just grazing to 4 inches rather than grazing down to the bone as we've set stop grazing often is. That was taken a couple of weeks ago. So we've got the calves almost hiding in the level of grass we've got. That grass has now gone to head, and you can't see the calves. As I said earlier, we're on Solaires, fantastic breed. One of the primary attributes I look for when I'm selecting my following stock is the depth of body, which I think has been lost in a lot of breeds that we're using in the UK currently. Without a big active rumen, you can't process forage, or the animal can't process forage. We're breeding cattle to just process concentrate in this country, and I think it's shocking. So this is last autumn. It's late October. We're still grazing. Significant regrowth. We didn't bring the cattle in until 20th of November last autumn. Normally they'd have been in by 20th of October, and they'd have been buffer fed, and the cows would have been creep fed by then. For me, it's an absolute no-brainer. The change is phenomenal. So the benefits from mob grazing using no fertiliser or less fertiliser, healthier stock. We don't buffer feed, we don't creep feed. We've got an extended grazing season, we bring them in that month later, and we're looking to now start turning out earlier, because we're getting far better utilisation of the forage. On the back of that shorter housing period, so we need less straw, less silage. We can carry more stock on the same area. We've got higher levels of rainfall infiltration because the soil is far healthier. We've got greater resilience to weather extremes. And due to the cell system, we've got even distribution of manures. In line with all this, we're massively increasing our herd efficiency. So the herd itself is high health, which we need with a pedigree breeder. We're using vaccinations and biosecurity to enable that. The bulls themselves are fertility tested. We're 9-week bulling period. We'd look to go potentially shorten that as well. And we're using quite a bit of AI with the heifers to bring in new genetics for ourselves and improve the herd on that basis. I've started using a tracker light system at the end of calving. So every cow that calves in the first 3 weeks gets a green light, everything calves in the next 3 weeks, it's an amber light, those in the last 3 weeks get a red light. And when that is added to its previous history, very quickly, you can very quickly see those cattle that are underperforming with low fertility in the herd. They'll often be what some people call the sleeper cows or the hidden cows. But once you start looking at it, you can very quickly pick out those that aren't functioning well in the herd. And by doing that, I can then remove those from the herd. And because it is so hereditary, we can remove their heifers or not keep any future heifers from those cows as well. So we're doubling up and increasing the efficiency. On the male side of things, we're looking for bulls with large scrotums. The bigger the scrotum, the more fertile the bull, and the more fertile his heifers will be. So we're looking at things on so many angles. We're retaining our own heifers that are coming from that first 3 weeks, not from later calvings, because again, it's hereditary. So if they've calved in the first 3 weeks, they're coming from a more fertile cow, and that will carry on with higher fertility in our own herd. And anybody that's buying in heifers, I would strongly recommend you to do the same. Ask the buyer when they start calving and select the heifers from their first 3 weeks of calving. We pelvic measure all the heifers, so we're maintaining that large pelvis that the Solera is renowned for, the biggest internal pelvic capacity of any breed. And using breed plan and my own spreadsheets, I'm breeding from the genetics and improving those genetics for maximum calf and milk growth, maximum milk, converting to maximum calf growth at weaning from grass alone. And that herd efficiency is absolutely vital for profitability and the ease of management and the carbon as well, because the more efficient the herd, the less carbon, the lower the carbon. So we convert that into the sums, eliminated the buffer feeding, reduced the housing period by a month, taking out the crate feed, reduced the nitrogen because of the herbal lays, a £10,500 saving. That's only a 38 cow herd. It's £275 a cow. You multiply that with bigger herds, savings are phenomenal. The investment in the water pipes and the infrastructure to enable the mob grazing, just under £4,000. And that's there for many years to come. The savings are absolutely phenomenal, and for herbal lays particularly, in my view, the mob grazing isn't, if you set stock graze herbal lays, those herbal lays aren't going to function in the same way, and you'll quickly lose a lot of the best species because the cows will be allowed to selectively graze. Excuse me. So just in summary, we're getting far less soil and nutrient loss because those glomalins are locking the soil together. We're using those fertilisers and pesticides. Big reduction in labour, fuel use and machinery. We're improving our soils significantly. Water holding capacity. For every 1% in organic matter increase, you're holding another 100,000 litres of water per hectare. That allows your crops to function far better when you've got a drought period. And it's also a massive natural capital service for the wider population, because if you can hold more water on your soils, it's not going down and running off and flooding the neighbouring village. We've got far better uptake, nutrient uptake, because we've got the arbusculum mycorrhizal fungi alive, and through not cultivating the soil, we're not breaking that fungi up, and that's doing what it needs to do and keeping the plant nutritionally balanced with carbon, sequestering carbon. Wildlife comes into it significantly. We've got far more hares, skylarks, we've got snipe on the farm, which we've never had before. We've got several breeding populations of grey partridge on the farm now. This has all been enabled through what we're doing, whether it be through farming without synthetic pesticides and much reduced fertiliser on the arable, whether it be through the mob grazing and the herbal lays on the grassland side of the farm. It's all going together in that mixed farm, allowing all these species to thrive, and we've got far greater resilience to weather extremes. Thank you.